I'm Candice Malcolm, and this is the Candice Malcolm Show. It is so great to be with you today, and we're announcing some exciting special news here at Juno News. So, one of the things that we do is publish journalism, try to tell the other side of the story, and just try to keep Canadians informed as to the important things that are happening in our country. Oftentimes, stories that the legacy media ignores and neglects, or just straight up tells wrong, spins, and doesn't give you the full picture. One of the other things that we try to do, though, is publish books, find authors and talented writers in Canada who have something to say, have another side of an interesting story. Probably the most important thing that we've done in recent years is publish the book Grave Error, written by Professor Tom Flanagan and CP Champion, to again tell the other side of the story when it came to the unmarked graves moral panic of 2021 and set the record straight, give the facts, tell people the story behind, the totally spun and over the top ridiculous propaganda pushed to you by the legacy media. We're very pleased today to announce that we are publishing a sequel to that book. The book is called Dead Wrong: How Canada Got the Residential School Story So Wrong. And I'm very pleased today to be joined by one of the authors, again, Dr. Tom Flanagan. So you know Tom very well here on the Candice Malcolm Show. He's a professor emeritus at the University of Calgary School of Public Policy, an award-winning author specializing in politics and Indigenous issues. He was Stephen Harper's campaign manager way back in the day in 2004, 2006. And of course, he is the co-author of Grave Error, which came out in 2023. So Tom, welcome to the program. Great to have you.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me.
So I really think that publishing Grave Error was one of the most important things that True North ever did. And, I've had you on the show several times to talk about that story and how it came to publish it. If you haven't read that book already, I encourage you to go out and read it. But today, available on Amazon and also at junonews.com, you can go and pick up the sequel, which is called Dead Wrong. And I encourage everyone to go do that. It makes a great holiday gift here. So Tom, why don't you just tell us a little bit about the book and why you decided to write a second one?
Yeah. Well, first of all, Candace, let me make one technical correction. I'm not the author. I'm the co-editor. The book consists of contributions by about 18 quite talented researchers and authors. So Chris Champion and I are the editors, and that was also true of Grave Error. So I don't want to take more credit than is due. It's a team effort, and that's what makes it so persuasive, I think, is that we bring together so much expertise. As to why we did this second book, well, Grave Error appeared in December of 2023, and the story goes on. Things have happened since then. So we wanted to cover the progress of the story of what I call the Kamloops narrative since December of 2023. And there have been some important developments. For example, the release of the pseudo-documentary Sugarcane, which was nominated for an Oscar. It didn't win, thank God, but still got enormous publicity in spite of containing dozens of historical efforts. And it takes off from the alleged discovery of 215 children's bodies at Kamloops, which of course was a false announcement. That's just one example, but there have been other stories, there have been other alleged discoveries at other places. There have been travesties of justice, for example, the firing of Jim McMurtry as a high school teacher in Abbotsford because he told students the absolute truth, which is that most students who died at residential schools died of tuberculosis. They weren't murdered. And he was fired for that. Never has obtained justice yet, still trying. The BC Law Society tried to impose the Kamloops narrative in its educational materials, finally was forced to back down by the relentless opposition of lawyer Jim Heller. But it took years, and they threatened him with a libel suit in the process. I could go on and on, but a lot of the Kamloops narrative has become now a fixture of Canadian political discussion, even though the Kamloops band have basically admitted that it's unsubstantiated. 2 years later, they put out a revised statement saying that what they found with their ground penetrating radar were soil anomalies. not bodies. I guess better late than never. But in the meantime, the story has become so fixed in the Canadian imagination that most of the media, uh, legacy media, with the one exception of the National Post, but other than that, the legacy media continue to write as if that story is true. I mean, it's unbelievable, really, that the original proponents don't even believe it. But it's become one of these things that's truer than true, sort of beyond evidence. Anyway, we keep trying to provide evidence about that and related issues.
Well, it really is one of those things that the facts of the story almost don't matter to many Canadians because the narrative has been so powerful in telling this story. And one of the important things that Grave Error did was talk about the historical fact of what residential schools really were, what they were really like. Interesting, I learned from that book that, I mean, basically the way that the story, the history of the residential schools was taught and how Canadians understood it prior to like the 1990s was that it was a force for good, right? We were trying to educate people and integrate them into the modern economy and give them opportunities and skills. Usually, when you think of educating impoverished people and ensuring quality education to people, it's thought of as a good thing, a public good. But suddenly, the idea of residential schools became that they were genocidal. And whether or not there's any evidence to that, it almost doesn't matter because that's what the media tell people. That's what's taught in schools. One of the important stories that you detail, one of the chapters that you did write in Dead Wrong, is about what happened in Quesnel. And so I'm wondering if you could sort of retell the story of the Quesnel saga to the audience here.
Yeah, talk about a farce. Uh, the wife of the mayor of Quesnel bought 10 copies of Grave Error. I mean, this is an author's dream, right? She buys 10 copies of Grave Error for distribution to friends. And the book got passed around, and the local Native community rose up against her and her husband. And they flooded a city council meeting and protested against her distributing the book. At that point, I don't think anybody had actually read the book except possibly the mayor's wife. Um, so anyway, what they were trying to get the mayor to resign because of his wife's taste in reading. Good on him, he refused to resign, and he eventually won a case in court over that. And now his wife is suing. I'm not exactly sure, some First Nations group for libel, I believe. So the drama continues, and with no end to it yet. But like, how ridiculous can you get? Protesting about distributing a few copies of a book before people even get a chance to read it. Um, so anyway, there's uh, a chapter in the book about that. Um, so that's one of the many things that happened. British Columbia has been the worst. Probably because Kamloops is in British Columbia, and so the narrative radiated out from Kamloops, and Quesnel is, well, it's not right next to it, but it's 200 or 300 miles away. Um, so that's one example of the craziness that we've seen. Now, uh, from the editor's point of view, it was wonderful. Grave Error, because of the publicity, Grave Error jumped up for about 3 weeks. It was on the top of the bestseller list in Amazon of all books. Not just history books or indigenous books. I mean, it was selling more than celebrity autobiographies or children's books or any kind of book,
Yeah.
due to the publicity from Quesnel. I mean, it's a bestseller in any case, but jumping to the top, number one, is almost unheard of for a book of that type with 800 footnotes. Uh, so
Well,
I thank I
that's
thank
a good
those people
point,
at
right?
Quesnel.
It's an academic book. It's mostly written by professors, scholars. A couple of journalists have essays in there as well. It's a dense read, right? It's not just something to
No,
be
it's not. It's
provocative.
not easy reading.
It's
No,
it,
no,
it's
the
it, it's
authors are
it, it's a
lawyers.
scholarly book. It gives historic accounts, and it's really there to provide some substance to the claims that we hear so often. And it's interesting the way that the media treat it, right? Like, I think that a big part of the reason it became such a popular bestseller at that point was because the CBC were writing hit pieces about it, calling you a denialist or a denier or whatever,
Hmm.
and basically just saying that the book itself was just so, it was like, it was so outrageous that someone would dare question this media narrative that had been created. The reality, again, is it's just bringing facts. And I should note that at the recent count, Tom, the book has sold over 25,000 copies. Right? I think it was you that noted that to become an academic bestseller in Canada, you have to sell something like 500 copies. So we're like orders
Yeah.
of magnitudes more. And the most important thing is that Canadians are just interested in the truth. They've heard this narrative. They've received the browbeating. I was having this conversation with my parents the other day about how a majority of young people now believe that Canada is an illegitimate country, that the residential schools were genocidal in nature. Not just assimilation, or the term that they use, cultural genocide, which doesn't really mean anything, but they were literal genocide, like they were killing camps, which is just so patently absurd. That we need to set the record straight. And I think there's a thirst for it. 25,000 doesn't even begin to say how many people have read the book, because we know that libraries across the country had year-long wait lists. There was, I think, 152 people in a waiting list in Calgary to read the book at the library. So certainly been read far and wide, and I think that there is really an appetite for this. But speaking of British Columbia, you say that that's sort of where things went the most crazy. I think a lot of people are concerned and interested in this BC Supreme Court case. So while I have you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Of course, back in August, the BC Supreme Court recognized Aboriginal title over a large part of land in Richmond, British Columbia, based on historic fishing rights for the Cowichan tribe, which is located, some 100 miles away on Vancouver Island. So what do you make of that? I know that there was recently an update to the story, which was that homeowners were warned that their private property may be in doubt due to this warning. Due to this court ruling. So they received letters from the city of Richmond, basically just informing them that the property is located within the claim area, and that it will have serious implications for their actual title and their land that they own, which is quite terrifying. What do you make of this whole thing, Tom?
Well, I'm glad I don't live in British Columbia. Uh, the political climate out there is bonkers. I have a good friend who wanted to retire to British Columbia, but he moved back to Alberta. He said he couldn't stand the politics. Um, this is uh, surprising, but not really. The It's what it is the logical outcome of a series of cases. Oh, going back years and years back to the 1960s. It's been a salami tactics, a step at a time, has gradually broadened the conception of Aboriginal title, and it got a huge boost when the constitutional amendments of 1982 were adopted, and Section 35 of the Act specifies that treaty and Aboriginal rights are now part of the Constitution. Um, well, there was a qualifier in there existing, but the courts haven't paid any attention to that. They've continually amplified the definition. So this is one more step in the amplification, which has been going on. Uh, the BC government didn't put up a very good case at trial. Now they claim they're going to appeal, and I mean they will appeal, but will it be for show? I don't know how seriously they will fight against it. Um, it the the decision could be overturned or adjusted on appeal. There are some weak points, some historical weak points, and that um, this will go on for several years. I'm sure it will go to the Supreme Court of Canada in the end. Um, so we'll have to wait and see what the full impact is. But regardless of what happens in this particular case, it's an index of the general trend in British Columbia. And we see now other claims being filed based with similar logic. There's one in Coquitlam just this week or last week that was in the news. So I think it's and it's not just in British Columbia. You've got parallel cases in Nova Scotia, Quebec, parts of Ontario, anywhere where the treaty, where there weren't explicit land surrender treaties, or where there's some ambiguity about it. You're going to have these claims. So that means most of Quebec, New Brunswick, a few parts of Ontario. The prairies, I think, are probably in the clear for now until the Supreme Court comes up with some new doctrine that overturns treaties, and I wouldn't rule that out as a possibility. Um, but basically, if there's been an explicit land surrender treaty, uh, as is true for the prairies and most of Ontario and bits of British Columbia, you're probably in the clear for now with your private title, and you don't have to worry about it. But if there is no explicit land surrender treaty, yeah, I have friends who wanted to retire to British Columbia. Other friends, not the one I mentioned, friends who want to retire there, and wow, they've been gobsmacked by this. I've been shipping them as much advice as I can find, but it really is it's uncertain. I guess that's the bad part of it. You don't know. It's the uncertainty, and of course, lenders don't want to venture in to cases where title is uncertain. So there have been rumors of people having trouble renewing mortgages in Richmond. I don't know if these are actually factual or not. I haven't seen a factually documented case, so maybe it's more rumor at the moment. Maybe it's more rumor, but it is certainly something that could happen. And the college and nations have said that they're not interested in taking over anybody's private title, and that's nice to hear. But the fact is that according to this judgment, they could. Even if they say they won't do it now, legally they could if this judgment stands. And who's going to give you a mortgage on that basis?
Well, and
So yeah, it's very disturbing.
it's also the precedent that it sets. I mean, there's some 200 different tribes in British Columbia. They don't have treaties out there, and so they all have land claims all over. There's 4 or 5 different tribes that claim Vancouver itself. My whole family still lives out there, and they are paying attention to this, but they don't seem to think it's as big of a deal. But I think you could draw a straight line from the 2021 false announcement of 215 unmarked graves discovered at an Indian residential school. It turned out to not be true at all, never been substantiated, to these latest iterations of Canadians just going out of their way to try to rectify for some historic wrongs that may or may not have actually occurred. You and Mark Milke had a really interesting piece in the National Post published a couple of days ago on, I think it might be occurring in print yesterday or today. And it says Canada wasn't stolen from Indigenous people. It was built on land that was received from Indigenous in exchange for benefits that continue today. False notions mustn't balkanize us. You do a really deep dive where you go back 25,000 years to talk about histories of migration and the origin of the Homo sapiens species, to talk about the different waves of migration that continued right up until the time Christopher Columbus came. There are disputes as to who was here at what point, but particularly you say this notion that you often hear about, especially in left-wing circles, that First Nations have been here for time immemorial, is simply not true. And that at a certain point, you have to recognize that Canada is a country. It was built up because of the contributions mostly of people from Scotland, England, France, working, yes, with the Aboriginal people. But, it was the hard work by subsequent waves of immigrants as well. We built a country. Enough with the billions and billions of dollars. You also highlight how much money is spent trying to rectify, 20, 30, $40 billion a year to First Nations is never ending. And yet, sorry to say, it doesn't seem like the quality of life for First Nations people has actually gotten a lot better despite the $40 billion in transfers that they get every year. So at a certain point, you kind of have to say enough is enough. I'll let you tell us a little bit more about that piece. It was really interesting. Recommend everyone go give it a read as well.
Well, thanks for the boost. Yeah, actually, Mark Milke was the primary author, but I'll take indirect credit because Mark is a former student of mine. I supervised his PhD thesis, so uh, it was nice of him to invite me in to fill in a few holes in the draft. Um, Yeah, the whole settler terminology is very pernicious. Uh, the word settler makes sense when you're writing about the uh, frontier. You know, the first European settlers in Canada. Yeah, that makes sense. But then to turn that into a continuing term that everybody descended from those people remains a settler forever. You know, I happen to be an immigrant. I was born in the United States and I came to Canada as an immigrant. But you know, you were born in Canada. You have no other country other than Canada. You can't go back to, I don't know where your ancestors came from, England, I suppose, at least in part. Um, you know, we're all here in Canada, and so calling some people settlers and other people indigenous is setting up an extremely bad polarization. So this vocabulary of the concept settler colonialism comes from woke ideology. It's one more malignant outgrowth of of progressive or woke ideology, which tends to divide the human race into dichotomies of oppressor and oppressed. So you get men and women, or straight versus gay, or whatever it may be. In this case, it's whites and others versus Indian, and throwing in Métis and Inuit as well. Excuse me. So yeah, that's the root of the problem, is this distinction. And original Canadian policy, we didn't have time to go space to go into that in that piece, but the original Canadian policy was to set aside refuges for Indians, or what we now call First Nations, which would be temporary in nature. And these would be places where they would be protected from the movement of white civilization while they learned the arts of civilization, which at the time was meant to include mainly literacy, agriculture, and Christianity. We would formulate it differently today, but in the understanding of the 19th century, that's what it was. So the reserves were meant to be temporary, and the goal was ultimately enfranchisement, as they called it, for all the Indians or First Nations people. Now, you know, like many government policies, it didn't turn out that way. It became what was thought to be temporary, became permanent, and now reserves are treated as sort of homelands, which are too small and have to be enlarged by claims on so-called traditional territory, which is a term that really has no legal definition. You can make it almost whatever you want it to be, as we've seen uh, in the Collegian case, where a fishing station, uh, which you know by nature is transitory, but that becomes the basis of a claim to Aboriginal title. I mean, I think that's one of the weak points in the decision, is that to prove Aboriginal title, you're supposed to prove that you had permanent occupation to the exclusion of others. But that's, you know, very questionable in the case of a fishing village on the other side of the channel. So anyway, uh, but I come back to the settler colonialism thing. That's a very pernicious doctrine. It's become so established now. It's influencing debate, but it's we've got to fight against that. Maybe there's another book there.
Well, there you go. No, I think it's right. So often, we're kind of on the front lines of the culture war here, and especially spending time on social media, you'll see that that term settler is used as a derogatory slur against white people, basically. And you're right to say that it exists in a historical context, but it shouldn't be used to divide us today. More and more, the more I read about this, the more I think we just need to have one category of Canadians and do away with the whole system of reserves and special rights and all these things which are meant to help, but actually I think in so many ways they hold us back. Well, Tom, I'm really excited about this book, Dead Wrong: How Canada Got the Residential School Story So Wrong. It's just you're right. There's so much that's happening, so much happening every day. The shocking unwillingness of the New York Times to retract a headline calling them mass graves at Kamloops, even though we know there is no such thing. Firing of school teachers, this documentary Sugarcane. There's so much in the book, folks. So I really recommend that you go pick it up, help it become another bestseller. I have an essay in there as well from my perspective of how the whole thing went down. So very pleased to be a part of this, and always a pleasure to have you, Tom, on the show. Thank you so much for joining us.
Okay, well, thanks for having me.
All right, folks, that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much. We'll be back again soon. I'm Candice Malcolm. This is Candice Malcolm Show. Thank you, and God bless.